In this tutorial, we're going to finish our look at functions, this time functions that take an argument. So we're going to the Marin Makerspace REPL page, going to the starter code functions 103. Once that opens, we're going to fork a copy of it to our account, and then let's begin. So we've talked about functions that perform a set of instructions. We've looked at functions that return information. Now we're going to look at functions that let us put data in and do something with it. So you can think of the data that we put into a function as an argument. Arguments are variables that are used by the functions. They are named after the function has been defined inside the brackets or the parentheses here, and you can have more than one, and if you do, you separate them with commas. So looking at this first example, we have a function called add5 with an argument named num1, and the instruction inside the function is to print num1 plus 5. So when I look at line number 8, it's a little repetitive. We don't need to print twice. So I'm going to get rid of this second print. All we have to do is call the function, which is add5, and then we pass in a number, and we do that by putting in that number inside the parentheses, because that's how the function's been defined. It takes one argument. It will only work with a number because we're doing math, but let's do a string just to see what would happen. Let's look at add5, 42. So that should be 42 plus 5, which will be 47. And then the add5 hello, and let's see if we get hello plus 5. And we don't. We get an error because it tells us that you can only concatenate a string, not an integer, to a string. So strings and strings, because this is looking at it as concatenation, not as multiplication. Now, if I did int 42, or sorry, int hello, I still think it's not going to like it, but let's see. Yeah, it's still invalid because hello is a string, it's not a number, so that won't work. We'd have to give it another number, like 5. So 47 and 10. Great, we'll comment those out and move farther down to investigate. I'm going to uncomment that had previously been hidden. Okay. So the following example performs the same task as above. It's adding a number, 5 to a number, but instead of having it fixed to 42, like we defined it here, we're going to ask the user for an input for a number, and then pass that user input into the function, and then we should see it print. So actually, I'll keep that one commented out. So let's go ahead and run that and see what happens. I get asked to enter a number. I'll enter 5, and we get 10. So that works, and that was great. The function is really just 2 lines, because you have to define it on the first and then the instruction on the second. But then the program is 2 lines. And is there a way that we can make this program more efficient? Meaning instead of 2 lines of code, 1 line of code. And that's kind of what we mean when we talk about efficient code. The least number of lines of code that also still make it readable and understandable. So I'm going to take this user input and the int here. I'm going to copy that int input, and I'm going to pass that directly into the function. Because if I can do 1 line of code here, the function is going to first ask for this number, and then it will pass that number into the function and run with it. So let's give that a try. Enter a number. See, it still works. We'll enter 7 this time. Should get 12, and I do. So one line of code to run this function is a little bit more elegant because or efficient. Not necessarily elegant, but it's efficient because it's only one line of code. Let's go down a little bit more and take a look at this function. So we would like you to add comments to explain the following. How many arguments does this function take? And what does the function do with the arguments? So print name takes 2 arguments. Arguments. And then what does it do with it? It prints arg1 and then gives a space. So it's printing arg1 space arg2 as a string. And so when you look at when the function's called printing a name, it's taking 2 strings, Abraham and Lincoln. So we'll add that. It takes 2 args strings. So if we run this, and I will turn this one off, I should see printed out Abraham Lincoln with a space in between Abraham and Lincoln. Yeah, we do. Okay. So we can do anything we want with these, variables. We could switch it around. Maybe instead of first name and second name, I switch it. And so when I run this, it would do Lincoln Abraham. Okay, let's comment that out. Move on to our next modify. So in modify, we want you to rename the function below so that it has a sensible name. My function is not sensible. Usually you want to name functions that are descriptive of what it's doing. And when we call it down here, we have to remember to change that too. So let's name this to origin country and origin country. So that's how we call it. And then it says use Sweden. So instead of Brazil, let's use Sweden. And before we get it to be user input, let's just run that as it is. And it says I am from Sweden instead of I am from Brazil. Okay, so this is going to print out the string that we pass it. And so we want to get the user input for a country. So similarly, up here to this add 5, where we did have a user input with an input that we passed in, I could just put the input into the function when I call it. So let's go down, and instead of Sweden here, let's put an input. Country. And then that would pass in whatever the user input is into this original country. Let's give that a run. So it's going to ask for a country. Let's do USA. I am from USA. Great. If I run it again, France. I am from France. So this works. That's really great. Okay, we'll comment that out and move on to the create. Now the create has already has some code here for us, and there are some instructions on where to put things. So let's take a look. Okay, so looking at the function, it's named times table. It takes 1 argument that's passed into it, and then it creates a variable called a counter, sets it equal to 1, and then we have a while loop. It says while the counter is less than 13, we're going to print counter times something. So it says put the correct variable here. I'm going to assume that it's counter times the num1, the argument that we're passing in. And so I'll get rid of that comment. And then add code to increment the counter. So we've learned this previously. It's counter plus equals 1. So then counter will become 2. And then the loop would return and says 2 is less than 13. And it would keep going. And so this function is going to take in a certain number, and it's going to print that number times 1, times 2, times 3, all the way up to 12, because it won't do 13. 13 is not less than 13, and it's not, because we don't have an equals here, it won't do 13. So it's going to be 1 through 12 for the times table. Okay, and then we're printing enter a number outside of the function. So this is our program. Our function was just that. Then the program begins where printing enter a number for the user, and the user input is a variable that's going to add code to get an integer input here. Okay, so we'll do int input, and because we've printed enter a number above, I don't need to put anything in the input. So I'm just going to leave it as that. Again, though, if we wanted to make things a little bit more elegant and efficient, I could take this print enter a number and I could put it inside the input, which is what I'm going to do. And so I'm just going to comment that out. So instead of having a 2-line program, I just have a 1-line program. So the user input is getting this integer input, enter a number, and now we need to call the function that will use the user input as the argument here. And you know what? I think we can make it even more efficient. Instead of putting user input here, which I certainly can do, this will work. But if I do times table and I copy this integer input and I put it in there, it will do the same thing. And then my program would only be 1 line of code. Oops. Instead of 2 lines of code. And it was going to be 3 lines of code. So I can have a 1-line program. Let's run that and see if we get enter a number. And then if it prints out all of the times table for that number. Get enter a number. So let's do a simple one. Let's do 2. And there we go. 2 times 1 all the way to 2 times 12. And that's our times table. Maybe we'd want to print out something inside our function to say the string of the num1 for concatenating. Let's run that again and see. So if I enter, let's say 2 again, oh, every time it would print. I wouldn't want that. So I'd want to put that outside the while loop. This is the 2's times table. And there we go. And if I really wanted inside here, I could, inside where I'm printing, I could put, what the counter actually is and what the number is, and then an equal and put it. But there's just many other ways that you can add to this to get a more robust output. And that wraps up functions. If you're looking for more of a challenge and would like to put some of what we've learned into practice, go back to the Marin Maker REPL page and look at the Try This Hangman or the Try This Fortune Teller code challenges. Use lists and for loops and functions, as well as the previous content we've learned to build out these games.